so weird. I'm supposed to ask the questions.
Okay, actually, why don't we switch last minute? I have to say hello. I'm Ruthie, and I should say from the very beginning, from the start, that I feel a little bit threatened sitting next to Zanny not because of, she's the editor of the great magazine, of all she's done in journalism, her brilliant interviews, but I found out actually from her the other day that she'd been to cookery school. And I just don't think that's fair. I didn't go to journalism school to become, a great editor, and you went to cookery school. But having said that, you are a great cook, and I know that food is important to you, and the Economist has probably done more or as much as all of us in the food world in terms of our concerns for food poverty, sustainability, politics, how we move forward in deliveries and eating at home and the future of restaurants that we have all done. So I salute her. I'm glad she went to cookery school, really. And I'd love to explore, as we do on our podcast, we explore, The Economist explores the world through words, and we explore the world through ingredients. We have a common purpose, and on the podcast we really use food to look at memories, and so I'd like to talk to you about that today, Zanny.
Thank you.
Starting with your father. Was it your father who actually told you to go?
Who insisted that I go to cookery school?
Because, yeah. And why do you think that was?
So after I left school, I took a year off, and I wanted to travel around the world, and I wanted to go by myself. And my dad was always very encouraging of everything, but he is, several of you here know him, he's extremely old-fashioned, and he felt that it was very important that a young woman going around the world needed to find a way to earn a living, and he had a very clear idea of how one earned a living. You had to learn to cook, and you had to learn to type. So I was sent off. I did a 4-week typing course in London to become what in those days was a temporary secretary, and I did the test. You had to do 60 words a minute for 5 minutes with no more than 5 mistakes, and after about 100 tests, I got that. And then he sent me off to cookery school, to a place in Wiltshire, where I learned, things like how to make choux pastry and all kinds of... Actually, what was useful, I'd grown up, food was really important at home, and my mum is a fantastic cook, so I've sort of grown up loving cooking. But what I learned from that month was actually, just some kind of useful... I learned how to make a souffle, I learned how to make choux pastry, I learned how to make some English classics. And then when I was at Oxford, I used to earn money by cooking dinner parties for friends of mine who wanted to kind of sit around, usually men, and have a pompous dinner party. And so I would cook the food.
As a job, you cooked?
As a job, they paid me to do it. And then I set up a little business making cookies and flapjacks and refreshments during the college productions of plays. And I made a lot of money doing it, which paid for all of my holidays in the summer.
So
it was never anything like yours, don't worry.
No. I didn't go to cookery school, so I don't, I learned to make a choux pastry by following Julia Child, if anybody is a fan of her books. But I think, so do you think he was right then? Would you tell that to one of your children to do that?
No, I wouldn't tell them to go and
no, they would never do
cookery
that.
School. But I think the instinct was right, which was have a skill that you can use to earn some money. Yeah. If you're going to go off by yourself, and it was whatever, 1985. He was incredibly supportive, and he just said, but you need to earn some money. And he was, it was quite a big deal. He agreed to pay for my ticket, which was not a small thing to do.
Where were you going?
I bought one of those, you used to be able to buy those round-the-world tickets. And I went from London to Hong Kong, from Hong Kong to Perth, from Perth to Sydney, from Sydney to New Zealand, from New Zealand to LA, and from LA back to London. Yeah. It took 7 months. And I worked in Sydney, I worked as a housekeeper for some rich old lady, and I had to make her a soft-boiled egg every morning, and that was it.
Did you learn that at cookery school?
I did not. I did actually know
It's
how
hard
to
make
that.
a good soft-boiled.
I love a soft-boiled egg. I had a soft-boiled egg this morning.
What's your technique?
Great.
Do you put it in cold water and heat it up, or boiling water and put it down?
I put it in boiled water and leave it in.
There you go. See,
Less than 4 minutes.
thought we knew everything about this woman. She's now taught us how to boil an egg, which is actually...
There are many ways, but getting it soft, and then you have to have it with which I had this morning for breakfast. I haven't had this in a while. You have it with soldiers with Marmite on.
With Marmite.
So good.
I wanted to do a project when I first came to London. I went to art school, and I wanted to do a project of finding Americans and giving them Marmite and taking a photograph of them to see what their reaction, because it's something for, I think it is a very British.
It's a totally British thing.
taste.
But I grew up with Marmite.
Yeah.
And
So tell us more about what you grew up with, because your mother was German.
My mother's German and my father's English, and I grew up on a farm in the countryside in Shropshire. And so
What kind of farm was it?
a mixed farm. We had, over the sort of whole course of my childhood, we had cattle, we had sheep, we had pigs, we had cereals, pretty much everything. And so we had our own meat. It was killed at the abattoir, but then we used to get whole lambs and whole pigs. We used to have a pig that we fed outside, and then poor old pig would see the end of its days, and it would arrive a little later. We had a big vegetable garden, lots of fruit trees, and so the whole...
Do you remember what they grew in the vegetable garden?
All the kinds of things you would expect. Red cabbage, potato, we had celeriac, I remember that, swede, lots of beans, French beans, runner beans, the whole... My kind of late summer as a child was really very much about going and being sent off to pick beans.
So it was, yeah.
And my mum she would freeze everything. She had 3 freezers, still has, 3 freezers, and enough kind of bottling space. I mean, we could have survived, an absolute siege for months and months.
Yeah.
And the tenor of the seasons were very clear there, because you were always doing something, making chutney, making jam. And she's a fantastic, fabulous cook, still is. But she was very German. She grew up was born in what is now East Prussia, was East Prussia, what's now Poland, in the Far East, and grew up on the south of Germany on Lake Constance. And as a result, the kind of cuisine from my grandmother, who I spent a lot of time with as a child, and my mother was a sort of Central European cuisine. So all of the stuff that I really associate with being a child, it was,
what was it?
Königsberger Klopse, which is like meatballs with caper sauce, schnitzel, of course, lots of sauerkraut, lots of sausage, Bauernessen, which is kind of boiled potatoes sliced up with bits of bacon and then egg all over it. Yeah. I mean, real kind of Central European comfort food. In Shropshire, it was a sort of strange juxtaposition.
Because she brought the food with her. She
brought the food and she brought the traditions. And it was there were a lot of kind of food-related traditions in our house. I mean, not just holidays, but Christmas. It was completely choreographed. We ate exactly the same thing Christmas Eve. We ate exactly the same Christmas Day. Sundays, we would have boiled eggs. My mother would bring out a different set of china for Sundays, every Sunday. We'd have Sunday lunch, was a big part of my childhood. So it was a kind of choreography of food.
What was the conversation around the table, apart from the food? Did you have your siblings?
I have 3 younger sisters. And when I was younger, the conversations at kind of lunch, and lunch was the big meal of the day, was always whether my dad was in a good mood or not. And if he was
let's stop there. Lunches were what?
The main meal of the day. When we were young, we ate our main meal at lunch.
Was lunch? Yeah.
And then as we grew older, it became dinner.
Was that British? Was that your mother? Was that just...
I don't know whether it was my mother, actually. Yeah, I don't know. But it was lunch, and it was a big question. My father would come in from being out farming, and was he in a good mood or was he in a bad mood? And if he was in a bad mood, it kind of dominated the whole table. We were all quaking. And then as we grew older, we would have huge debates, and I famously would have huge arguments with my dad, but they were sort of, I guess, wonky policy debates. As a sort of teenager, I took it upon myself to say that I thought agricultural subsidies were a really bad idea. He did not think this was terribly sensible, and
he would listen.
He listened. I mean, we're quite similar, and so we would sort of talk loudly at each other for a while. But
were you always more of the adventurous side to him? Was he more conservative?
No, he was very adventurous. He was. Where I grew up, my family, or my dad's family, has lived for hundreds of years, and he always knew that he was going to go back and farm that. But he went off as a young man and was in the army, and then lived abroad for a while, and absolutely loved that, but always felt this kind of admirable sense of duty that he was going to come back and to the farm. And he did, and that's been his life's work. And even now, we're trying to persuade him that pushing 87, maybe he should perhaps scale back a bit. But he's absolutely not. And he was the sort of dominant person in the household, and my mum is, and she sort of held the whole thing together. She was an incredible cook, and it was a lot of life in the countryside. It's very. I mean, I look back now, and it's very simple. I mean, it was very simple, but it was great. I had horses. I used to be outside all the time. We didn't lots of things. Like I had pasta for the first time. I was quite old when I had.
Oh yeah.
I mean, fresh pasta not until I was a teenager. It was.
But did they travel? Would they take you on holidays to Europe?
We went on. I went to Germany every year because my grandmother lived there. And when I was between the ages of 7 and 11, 4 times, I spent between Christmas and Easter living with my grandmother and going to the local school in Germany. And my grandmother was also a fantastic cook, but she went through the Second World War. She lived through some quite tough times. So she was both extremely opinionated, quite frugal, and very dominant. And so, but she loved good food. She absolutely loved it. So she would wake up in the morning very early and go to the bakery that opened at, I think, like 7 or something.
In a small village.
It was a sort of satellite village of a town. I mean, I took my family there for my mum's 70th, and they said, "Why are you so excited about this place? It looks suburban." But to me, it was a sort of satellite town. But she went to the baker, and she would get fresh rolls, and we'd have fresh, delicious. And German bread is really, really, really good. And German rolls are delicious, with amazingly good butter and jam. And then, then she'd make me a packed lunch for school, and then I'd come back in the evening, and there'd be some incredible meal. And I remember I put on so much weight the first time I went to Germany. I kind of came back, waddling in to see my mother. Said, "Oh, you have had a good time." I went, "Yeah, well, I have." But it was that sort of mixture of. So I did spend quite a lot of time abroad, and going from my primary school in Shropshire, which had I think 60 students. It was very small. And you couldn't do this nowadays, take a kid out of primary school for 3 months and just go to a different country. But then it was fine. And so I had this sort of interestingly bifurcated time. I was one bit very rural in Shropshire, one bit in Germany, which I suspect kind of was quite formative in who I became.
It's the relationship that you described with your grandmother is familiar to me because so many people that I've talked to, especially if they're grandparents come from another culture, talk more about their grandmother's food than their mother's food. And I think that relationship comes through in the time, and probably having you for those months gave you that secure, the joy of traveling.
I think it did. And my grandmother was obviously a very big influence on my mother. And she used to come for Christmas until she was very sick at the last sort of 15 years of her life. But until I was about 12, 13, she came every year for Christmas. And she would bring in sort of air-wrapped plastic bags the sausages for our Christmas Eve meal. And we had, every year for Christmas Eve, we had what are called Zeitgeist, which are basically like Frankfurters, but sort of German sausages in beer sauce with sauerkraut and boiled potatoes. Yum. I mean, not everyone's cup of tea, but I thought it was completely delicious. And then we branched out and we got fatty sausages. So there were thinnies and fatties, and there was much debate in my family as to whether you were a thinny person or a fatty person, which ones you liked.
What did you like?
I liked fatties, but there were others who liked thinnies. And it was just a central part, and she would come every year, and then she would teach me. There was this, we're not terribly religious, but we did have this family grace that we would say at this Christmas Eve dinner. And it was sort of imbued in me. I learnt it. And so now, it's the one tradition that we really do keep going, Christmas Eve. We don't have fatty sausages any longer, but we do have my grandmother's grace.
Yeah. And taking that through later, because you then, let's go into did you know that you wanted to be a journalist? Did you know that the issues when you were in your travels, when you were going to that round of world ticket, did that ground you in the idea of communicating that through words, through journalism?
I didn't. I think I knew that I wanted to live and work abroad before I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I think when I was very young, like a bajillion people of my age, I wanted to be an air stewardess, flight attendant as they're called now, because that seemed to be the way to travel. I knew I wanted to spend a lot of time traveling. And then I did quite a lot of student journalism as an undergraduate, and that's when I got the kind of, when I got the kind of, I thought this is what I like doing. And then the sort of real aha moment was actually when I was at graduate school in the US after the Berlin Wall came down. Right. And I went with a small group of students from Harvard to work for the finance ministry in Poland. And that's when I saw what happened when you have economic reform, when you free prices, when you free up an economy. And I suddenly thought, I really want to understand how economies function. I want to understand what happens when you bring, you move from communism to capitalism, when you bring freedom to a country. And that was the kind of aha, life-changing moment.
And you were working for the finance ministry.
I worked for the Ministry of Finance, in the Polish government.
Looking out, and then you wanted to be more of the outside looking in and progressing.
Yeah, I went from there, then I worked in Ukraine for a bit. Then I worked for the IMF, which was the International Monetary Fund, the kind of macroeconomic policeman. And then I realized that I wasn't actually cut out for big bureaucracies. And so then I became a journalist and joined The Economist.
I was with Ruth this morning, Ruth Port, is she here? And we were talking so much about food in the digital age. What we were talking about is what is happening, and so I think that bringing that to, as a person who, I was with the CEO of Uber a few weeks ago, and he said, Ruthie, what we do now is we bring people to food, but there is going to be a time when we bring food to people, And so for me, as just in a personal way, I think it's at the end, will we still be going to restaurants? Will we still be going, we don't know if we'll be going to work, whether we go to the theater, or theater will come to us, movies will come to us. But I was wondering how you feel in terms of your work at the, doing what you do, and food, and meeting people. How does it work in the world of journalism?
So I think food for me, food is actually about connection with people. I mean, we've talked about my family, it was about connection then. It was all of us together. With my kids, we didn't always manage it every single night, but it was a really big deal that we would have dinner together. And my kids love cooking, and we love nothing more than to actually all get together and cook. And I now don't cook during the week that much because I'm either not at home or I get home late. But for me, it's very relaxing, but I would never, ever, ever cook just for myself.
Have you never cooked a meal for? I haven't. I don't
never cook a meal for myself. Yeah. I mean, I'll maybe an omelette if I'm starving.
Do you go to a restaurant by yourself?
Yeah, I'll go. If I'm traveling, I will go to a restaurant by myself, and I'll sit and have a nice something to eat and a glass of wine, and I love that. And I love it with a book, and I love it if nobody comes to talk to me, and it's fantastic.
Okay, note to self. We won't talk to you, but do you read? So but you do take a book. You read while you're.
I do take a book because if you don't take a book, people come and talk to you.
Oh, okay.
It's really important. You have to have a book. But food is about being together, right, with people. And so when I'm traveling, and now I get to travel with, my amazing colleagues in lots of different countries, I get to see incredibly interesting people. I've learned that food, in almost every place I go to, food is an extremely important way that the people you are talking to show you their country. But in China, I have make an annual trip to China, and I come back unable to eat another kind of Chinese meal because I have huge lunches and huge dinners, and you have those tables that those Chinese tables, and you sit there for hours and hours, and it's all very formal, and some of it's delicious, some of it's less so, but it's incredibly important part. In Japan, which I don't know very well, but again, immensely important around, and the rituals around food.
It's the ritual, isn't it?
Oh my God, I once. Most embarrassing thing. You would never do this. I put my chopsticks into the rice.
Oh.
Absolutely. You only do that when someone's died, apparently. It was a complete sort of faux pas.
Science,
yeah, absolutely don't do that. But in almost everywhere, you get a sense of a place when you go out, when you are with people, when you go out to dinner. Like I would never.
Would you interview? Do you ever do interviews with food?
Yeah, I mean, not like you. I mean, not kind of
sitting there and eating.
Yes, absolutely. I often will have lunch.
You learn about somebody. I always think that a friend of mine said that he likes to interview candidates for a job over food, because what's like dating? If you go on a date and you go to a restaurant, you say, do they talk to the waiter? Do they share their food? Do they in a certain way? Do you find that?
Yeah, you get an insight into what people are like. And it's not, I don't give two hoots about how people hold their fork or anything like that. It's not that. It's you definitely get an insight into what a person is like.
And what have you found that you found? Have you ever thought this person could be good and then been with them in a restaurant and thought, no?
Yeah, it's more that people I've been, not less than people I've been interviewing for jobs and more people I've been trying to get to know. And the relationship changes with someone who, I don't know, someone, whether it's someone important or not important that you're trying to get to know better, you really get to know them much better over a meal.
Being on the other side, I always think it's interesting that people do very private things in a very public space. Why do people, announce they're having an affair in a restaurant, or people get fired in a restaurant? No, people cry. I once called up a restaurant and said, would you go bring a glass of champagne to my friends? It's their anniversary. And they said, we can't because she hasn't stopped crying. And so I think, we had somebody who once wanted to propose to their girlfriend, and he said, would you write a cake and write, will you marry me on the cake? And then we did. We made a beautiful cake, and halfway through he came up and said, cancel the cake. So we always wonder what happened in that first thing. But Carrie, so you do go to restaurants.
I do. I love going to restaurants. I go out a lot. But I also really like, particularly with my family, cooking at home. That's my sense of relaxation. It's what we do at weekends. It's what we do when the kind of family's together. There's something sort of, just as I would never cook just for myself, there's something that the whole kind of process of cooking together, putting bad music on, chatting. We have playlists of bad music that we listen to when we're cooking. And then having a big meal all around it, bringing friends. It's absolutely my complete favorite.
So I don't have to worry too much about bringing food to people. You think people will still come?
I think people will still. In fact, I think in the world that Ruth and others are creating in the AI world, I'm convinced that there will be things, we will all still want to do things with other humans. There may be intelligent AIs that can do everything better than us, including perhaps cooking, but I will still want to have food that you've cooked.
And I think we're looking at a clock, which is saying we need to stop, and maybe now. But
zero.
If you were on Ruthie's table 4, which we're going to do and have more time together, we always end with a question. I was told that, by Kirsty Young, Ruthie asked one question of everyone. And rather than ask that question, as I was telling Ruth this morning that I hate, which is what would be your last meal, because I kind of imagine myself in a prison cell, going to die the next day.
Is that what you're going to ask me?
No, I'm not going to ask you what is your last meal, but I will ask you if food, eating, alleviates hunger, and it is a performance, and it's a connection. It is also comfort. And so I hope you don't need comfort very often, but if you do think about comfort, eating for comfort, is there a food that you would go for?
I think of food that reminds me of home, which is the kind of food I've just been talking about. I wouldn't go and cook it, but I like nothing more than going home and having something that my mum has cooked. So, or going to...
What would that be? Can you choose one?
I think Königsberger Klopse are right up there. Meatballs in
Can you say that slowly?
Delicious.
What's it called?
Königsberger Klopse.
Königsberger Klopse. Okay, that's what we're going to cook.
But you know what? Your branzino is pretty damn good too.
Okay. Thank you. More to follow. And thank you. I think that I don't feel threatened anymore. She could go to cookery school. I'm not going to journalism school, but I've loved every minute of being with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you.